Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My apartment building on Whitmore Road had always been the kind of place where neighbors actually knew each other. Not just a quick nod in the hallway, but real conversations, shared meals during holidays, that sort of thing. Having turned 34 the previous spring, I had lived in Unit 4B for almost 6 years by December of 2022, long enough to know everyone by name and most of their stories too. The building itself was nothing fancy, a 3-story brick structure built sometime in the 70s, with creaky radiators and windows that let in cold drafts during winter. But the people made it feel like home. We had young couples, a few single professionals like myself working in insurance claims processing, and several elderly residents who had been there for decades. It was the kind of community that felt increasingly rare in a world where most people barely acknowledge their neighbors exist. Dorothy Callahan lived in Unit 2A, right at the bottom of the main stairwell. She was 73 years old, a retired school librarian with silver hair. She always kept pinned up in a loose bun and these thick reading glasses that made her blue eyes look enormous. Dorothy had moved into the building back in 1994 with her husband Gerald, who passed away from a heart attack in 2015. But the real tragedy in her life happened in 2017, when her only son Raymond disappeared without a trace. He was 41 at the time, lived about 2 hours away in Columbus, and one day he just vanished. His car was found abandoned at a rest stop off the interstate, keys still in the ignition, wallet on the passenger seat. Police investigated for months but never found him, never found a body, never found any real answers. Dorothy never stopped hoping he would come back, but you could see in her eyes that something inside her had broken the day Raymond went missing. She kept his photograph on her mantle, kept his childhood bedroom items in storage, kept waiting for a phone call that never came. It was my neighbor Vivian from Unit 4A who first came up with the idea for the Christmas surprise. Vivian was a pediatric nurse in her late 40s, one of those people who seem to run entirely on coffee and good intentions. She knocked on my door the second week of December with this excited look on her face, explaining that she wanted to organize something special for Dorothy. The poor woman had been looking more withdrawn than usual lately, barely leaving her apartment, and Vivian thought a gesture from the whole building might lift her spirits during the holidays. The plan was simple. Everyone would wrap a small gift, something thoughtful and personal, and we would leave them all outside Dorothy's door on Christmas Eve night. She would wake up Christmas morning to find a pile of presents from people who cared about her. It sounded sweet, the kind of thing that reminds you humanity is not completely terrible. I agreed immediately and offered to coordinate with the residents on the 3rd floor. By December 23rd, we had collected 17 wrapped gifts from nearly every unit in the building. Some people had bought new things: a soft cashmere scarf, a box of fancy chocolates, a leather-bound journal. Others had gone the homemade route, with knitted mittens and jars of preserves and handwritten cards. I contributed a vintage edition of To Kill a Mockingbird that I found at an antique shop, knowing Dorothy's background as a librarian. We stored everything in Vivian's apartment until the big night, and there was this genuine excitement buzzing through the hallways whenever neighbors passed each other. Even old Mr. Hoffman from 3C, who usually complained about everything and everyone, had contributed a tin of Danish butter cookies. That Christmas Eve, around 11 at night, a small group of us quietly made our way down to the 2nd floor. We arranged all the gifts in a neat semicircle outside Dorothy's door, placed a card on top that read, "From your Whitmore Road family," and tiptoed back upstairs feeling like we had done something genuinely good. I woke up Christmas morning to the sound of screaming, not the startled yelp of someone who dropped something or got surprised. This was a raw, guttural sound that seemed to tear through the walls of the building like it had physical weight. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, and for a few seconds I just sat there trying to process what I was hearing. The clock on my nightstand showed 7:42 in pale green numbers. The screaming continued, rising and falling in waves. And then I heard doors opening in the hallway, footsteps, voices overlapping in confusion. I threw on a sweatshirt and rushed out of my apartment, nearly colliding with Vivian, who had the same panicked expression I must have been wearing. We both knew without saying it, the sound was coming from downstairs, from Dorothy's floor. When we reached the second-floor landing, there were already 4 or 5 neighbors gathered outside Unit 2A. Dorothy's door was wide open, and I could see her sitting on the floor just inside the entrance, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and scattered gifts. She was not screaming anymore, but making this horrible keening sound, rocking back and forth with her arms wrapped around herself. Her face was the color of old chalk, and there were tears streaming down her cheeks in 2 unbroken lines. I pushed past the others and knelt beside her, asking what happened, what was wrong, but she could not form words. She just kept pointing at something on the floor near the welcome mat, a rectangular box about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper with no bow or ribbon. The paper had been ripped open on one side, revealing a white cardboard container underneath. I did not understand at first, could not comprehend why this one package among all the others had reduced her to this state. Then I noticed the smell, faint but unmistakable, something chemical mixed with something organic, and my entire body went rigid with a primal kind of recognition that bypassed rational thought entirely. Vivian was the one who called 911. Her voice was remarkably steady as she gave the address and tried to explain the situation, though I could see her free hand trembling against her thigh. Someone had wrapped a blanket around Dorothy's shoulders, but she did not seem to register it, did not seem to register anything happening around her. I stayed beside her on the floor, not touching the box, not getting any closer to it than I already was. The other neighbors kept asking questions. What is it? What did she see? Should we look inside? But I told them to stay back, told them not to touch anything. I had watched enough true crime documentaries to know that much. The minutes until the paramedics and police arrived felt stretched and distorted, like time itself had gotten stuck in that cramped hallway. I remember staring at the torn brown paper, at the generic white box beneath it, and noticing there was a piece of paper visible through the opening Dorothy had made. It looked like a handwritten note, the letters dark and angular, but I could only make out a few words from my angle. One of them was Raymond. The police cleared the hallway within 15 minutes of arriving. 2 officers in uniform took statements from everyone, while a detective in plain clothes, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Paulson, examined the scene inside Dorothy's apartment. The paramedics had taken Dorothy to the hospital for shock, and Vivian had gone with her, leaving the rest of us standing around in the first-floor lobby like lost children on a field trip gone wrong. I gave my statement mechanically, explaining the Christmas surprise, how we had arranged the gifts, what time we had placed them outside the door. The officer, taking notes, asked if I had seen anyone unfamiliar in the building the previous night, anyone coming or going who did not belong. I told him no, that I had gone straight to bed after we finished setting up the gifts around 11:15. He wrote everything down without expression, thanked me, and moved on to the next neighbor. It was almost noon before Detective Paulson came down to the lobby and gathered us together. Her face was carefully neutral, the kind of professional mask that people in her line of work must practice for years. She told us that the contents of the package were being treated as evidence in an ongoing investigation, that she could not share details, but that she needed to know if any of us had contributed that particular brown-wrapped box to the gift pile. We all looked at each other, shaking our heads, a chorus of confused denials. The truth about what was in that box came out 3 days later, though not through official channels. Vivian had stayed in close contact with Dorothy's younger sister, a woman named Carolyn, who had driven up from Kentucky the moment she heard what happened. It was Carolyn who told Vivian, and Vivian who told me, her voice barely above a whisper, as we stood in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors. The box had contained human remains, specifically a partial set of skeletal hand bones, cleaned and preserved, sealed inside a plastic bag. There had been a silver ring mixed in with the bones, a class ring from Ohio State University with the year 1994 engraved on the side. Raymond Callahan had graduated from Ohio State in 1994. The note inside the box was handwritten in block letters on plain white paper, and according to Carolyn, it said, "Merry Christmas, Dorothy." I kept him close all these years. "Now you can too," he screamed for you at the end. I felt physically ill as Vivian recited those words. Whoever had sent that package had not just killed Raymond. They had held on to pieces of him for 5 years, waiting, planning, choosing the exact moment to deliver maximum devastation to a grieving mother. The investigation that followed consumed the next several weeks of our lives. Detectives interviewed every resident multiple times, pulled surveillance footage from nearby businesses, canvassed the entire neighborhood asking if anyone had seen someone approach the building on Christmas Eve. The security camera at the convenience store across the street had captured a figure walking toward our building around 10:30 that night, about half an hour before we placed our gifts outside Dorothy's door. The footage was grainy and shot from a bad angle, showing only a person in a dark coat and knit cap, carrying what appeared to be a small package. They walked with a slight limp, favoring their left leg, but beyond that there were no distinguishing features. No face, no clear height estimate, nothing that could identify them. The police traced the brown wrapping paper to a generic brand sold at dozens of stores across 3 states. The white box inside was equally untraceable, the kind you could buy in bulk from any shipping supply company. Whoever had done this understood forensics, understood how to remain invisible, and had clearly spent years preparing for this single act of cruelty. Dorothy never returned to the apartment on Whitmore Road. Carolyn moved her belongings out in mid-January, while Dorothy recovered at a psychiatric facility in Kentucky, and the unit stayed empty for months afterward, a silent reminder of what had happened every time I walked past it. The DNA analysis from the bones came back in February, confirming what everyone already suspected. They belonged to Raymond Callahan. The case officially shifted from a missing persons investigation to a homicide, but that change in classification did not bring any new leads. Detectives theorized that Raymond had been targeted by someone he knew, possibly someone with a personal grudge, but they could never establish a clear suspect. His co-workers, friends, ex-girlfriends, everyone had alibis, everyone passed their polygraphs, everyone seemed genuinely shocked that quiet, unremarkable Raymond had met such a violent end. The person with the limp from the surveillance footage became a ghost that haunted the investigation. A phantom that had appeared for 30 seconds on a grainy camera and then dissolved back into the anonymous mass of humanity. By spring, the detectives stopped coming around as frequently. By summer, the case had gone cold. I still live in the same building, though not a single day passes without me thinking about that Christmas morning. The community we had built here never fully recovered. Some residents moved out within weeks, unable to shake the feeling that someone had walked among us, studied our routines, and used our own kindness as a delivery mechanism for something unspeakable. Vivian transferred to a hospital across town and took an apartment closer to her new workplace. Mr. Hoffman died of natural causes the following autumn, and I sometimes wonder if the stress of that day accelerated his decline. Dorothy passed away 18 months later, according to Carolyn, who sent a brief note to the building's remaining residents. She said Dorothy never spoke about Raymond or the package again, that she had simply retreated into herself until there was nothing left. I think about the person who did this, whoever they are, walking around somewhere with the knowledge of what they accomplished. They are probably still alive, still free, maybe even satisfied with the destruction they caused. The police never identified them, never came close as far as I know. And every Christmas Eve, when I see neighbors exchanging gifts and spreading holiday cheer, I find myself scanning the street outside my window, watching for a figure in a dark coat, walking with a slight limp carrying a package meant for someone who will never see it coming. On December 18, 2017, a judge sentenced Victor Holloway to 18 months in state prison. and I finally remembered what it felt like to exhale. My high school graduating class had their 10-year reunion that fall, and while everyone else was sharing photos of their kids and promotions, I was just grateful to be breathing without checking the locks 3 times before bed. We had been together since I turned 24, and by the time the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, I had a crooked nose that never healed right, a restraining order he violated twice, and a collection of medical records thick enough to serve as evidence in court. I sat in that courtroom for 20 minutes after everyone left, just letting myself believe it was actually over. My hands were still, my breathing was normal, and for the first time in years I felt like maybe I could exist in the world without constantly scanning for exits. 7 days until Christmas, and for once, the holiday season did not feel like a minefield. My friend Harper had been my lifeline through all of it. We met working at the same insurance office in Dayton, Ohio, back when my life still made sense. She had moved about 40 minutes north to a small town called Bellefontaine with her husband Greg a couple years prior, and she had been asking me to visit ever since. When she called me 3 days before Christmas and heard that I was planning to spend the holiday alone in my apartment eating frozen lasagna, she practically demanded I come stay with them. They were hosting a small gathering on Christmas night, she said. Just some neighbors and Greg's brother and his wife, nothing fancy. I almost said no out of habit because saying no had become my default setting. But something in her voice made me pause. She reminded me that Victor was locked up, that I deserved to have one normal holiday, that I needed to start rebuilding. So I said yes. I packed a small bag that Friday morning, December 22nd, and drove north through light flurries, telling myself the whole way that this was what healing looked like. Harper and Greg lived in a 2-story colonial on Birch Lane, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and Christmas lights that actually matched. When I pulled into their driveway, Harper came running out in slippers and a cardigan, wrapping me in a hug before I even got my bag out of the trunk. She looked good, healthy, and happy in a way that made me realize how much weight I had lost over the past year. Greg waved from the doorway, holding their golden retriever by the collar so he would not bowl me over. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and there was a fire crackling in the living room. For the first 2 days, I did nothing but sleep, eat Harper's cooking, and watch terrible holiday movies on their couch. I did not check the windows. I did not sleep with my phone clutched in my hand. I did not flinch when Greg came around a corner unexpectedly. It felt like borrowing someone else's life, and I was terrified of how much I wanted to keep it. Christmas morning was quiet and slow. Harper made French toast with powdered sugar, and we exchanged small gifts by the tree while snow fell outside. I gave her a scarf I had knitted during all those nights I could not sleep, and she cried a little when she unwrapped it because she knew what those stitches represented. Greg's brother Dennis arrived around noon with his wife Lydia, and they brought enough food to feed a small army. The neighbors started trickling in around 4, a retired couple named the Burks, and a younger woman named Mia who worked at the local library. By 6 o'clock, the house was warm and loud with conversation, and someone had put on a playlist of old Christmas songs that made everything feel golden and safe. I stood in the kitchen helping Lydia arrange appetizers on a platter, and I remember thinking that this was what normal people did. This was what holidays were supposed to feel like. I had almost forgotten. Around 7:30, I stepped out onto the back porch to get some air. The house had gotten warm with all the bodies and the fireplace going, and I needed a moment to myself. The backyard was small and tidy, bordered by a wooden fence that separated it from the neighbors. Snow had been falling steadily all evening, and everything was covered in a thick white blanket that muffled the world. I stood there with my arms wrapped around myself, breathing in the cold and watching my breath turn to fog. From inside, I could hear laughter and the muffled sound of Bing Crosby singing about a white Christmas. I was about to go back in when I noticed movement at the far end of the yard, near the gate that led to the side alley. It was dark back there, the porch light not reaching that far, but I could have sworn I saw a shape. A person, maybe, standing just beyond the fence. I squinted into the darkness, my heart picking up speed despite my best efforts to stay calm. But then Mia opened the back door and asked if I wanted more wine, and when I looked again, there was nothing there. just snow and shadows and my own paranoid imagination. I went back inside and tried to shake it off. 4 years of living in fear had rewired my brain to see threats everywhere, and I knew that. My therapist had warned me about hypervigilance, about how my nervous system would need time to understand that the danger had passed. So I poured myself another glass of wine and rejoined the party, laughing at Greg's terrible jokes and listening to the Burkes tell stories about their grandchildren. But I kept drifting toward the windows. Every few minutes I would find myself standing near the front of the house, looking out at Birch Lane through the gaps in the curtains. The street was quiet and empty, lined with other houses decorated for the holiday, their windows glowing with warm light. Nothing unusual. No one lurking in driveways or standing on corners. Just a peaceful Christmas night in a small Ohio town. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Victor was in prison, 40 miles away, locked behind concrete and razor wire. He could not hurt me anymore. I repeated it like a mantra, but some part of me, some animal instinct buried deep in my chest, refused to believe it. It was almost 9 when I saw him. I had wandered into the front room to grab my phone from my purse, and as I straightened up, I glanced out the window facing the street. There, across the road, standing perfectly still on the sidewalk in front of a dark house, was a man. He was wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low, and he was staring directly at Harper and Greg's house, directly at the window where I was standing. The streetlight behind him cast his face in shadow, but I knew that silhouette. I knew the way he stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, the way he held his hands in his pockets, the specific tilt of his head when he was watching me. My whole body went rigid, every muscle locking into place like someone had flipped a switch. It was Victor. I knew it was Victor. Every cell in my body screamed his name, even though my rational mind was insisting it was impossible, that he was in prison, that I was seeing things. But I was not seeing things. He was right there, not 50 feet away, watching me through the falling snow. I must have made some kind of sound because Harper appeared at my side a moment later. She asked me what was wrong and I pointed at the window, my finger trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. She looked, and I watched her face for the recognition, for the horror that I was feeling. But she just frowned and shook her head. She said she did not see anyone. I looked again, and the sidewalk was empty. Just snow and darkness and the faint glow of Christmas lights from the house across the street. Harper put her hand on my arm and asked if I was okay, and I could hear the concern in her voice, but also something else, something careful. She thought I was having some kind of episode, some trauma response, and maybe she was right. Maybe the stress of the holiday and being around so many people had triggered something. I apologized and said I was fine, just tired, just imagining things. She gave me a long look but did not push it. She suggested I go lie down for a bit, take a break from the noise. I nodded and headed upstairs to the guest room, but I did not lie down. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, watching the street through the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The party continued downstairs, and I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and music drifting up through the floor. I told myself that if I did not see anything else, I would go back down and pretend everything was fine. I would chalk it up to exhaustion and too much wine and a brain that had been conditioned to expect danger around every corner. But then, at exactly 9:42 according to the clock on the nightstand, I saw him again. He had moved. He was no longer across the street but standing at the edge of Harper's property, right where the driveway met the sidewalk, partially hidden behind the old oak tree in the front yard. The streetlight caught him just enough for me to see that he had taken off his cap. His hair was shorter than I remembered, buzzed close to his skull, and even from this distance I could see he was smiling. Not a normal smile. The kind of smile he used to give me right before things got bad. The kind that said he knew something I did not, that he was enjoying my fear, that he had all the time in the world. I grabbed my phone and called 911. My voice was shaking so badly that the dispatcher asked me to repeat myself 3 times. I told her my ex was outside, that he was supposed to be in prison, that he had a history of violence and I was afraid for my life. She told me to stay inside, stay away from windows, and that officers were on their way. I went downstairs and pulled Harper into the kitchen, away from the other guests. I told her I had called the police, that I had seen Victor again, that he was on the property. Her face went pale, and for the first time she did not look at me like I was fragile or confused. She looked scared. Greg must have noticed something was wrong because he came in a moment later, and Harper quickly explained the situation in a low voice. He wanted to go outside and check, but I grabbed his arm and begged him not to. Victor had put 2 men in the hospital before we started dating, something I only found out later, and I could not stand the thought of Greg getting hurt because of me. We turned off the music and quietly told the other guests there was a situation, that the police were coming, that everyone should stay inside and away from the doors. The Burkes looked confused but compliant. Dennis kept asking what was going on, his voice too loud, and Lydia had to shush him. Mia pulled out her phone and started recording the front yard through the window, saying she wanted to get evidence if he showed up again. We all stood there in the living room, the Christmas tree lights blinking cheerfully in the corner, waiting for the sound of sirens. The police arrived in under 10 minutes, 2 cruisers with their lights flashing red and blue against the snow. I watched from the window as 4 officers got out and began searching the property with flashlights, checking behind the oak tree, walking the perimeter of the fence, shining their beams into the alley behind the house. They found footprints in the snow, fresh ones leading from the sidewalk to the oak tree, and then back toward the street, where they disappeared near a set of tire tracks. One of the officers, a woman with short gray hair and a calm, steady voice, came inside to take my statement. I told her everything, starting with who Victor was, and what he had done to me and when he was supposed to have been sentenced. She wrote it all down without interrupting, her expression neutral but not unkind. When I finished, she stepped outside to make a phone call. I could see her through the window, pacing back and forth on the porch, her breath visible in the cold air. She was on the phone for a long time. When she came back in, her face had changed. There was something tight around her eyes, something that looked a lot like anger barely held in check. She asked me to sit down, and I knew before she said anything that I had not been imagining things. She explained it slowly, like she was choosing each word with care. There had been an administrative error at the state facility where Victor was being held. Some kind of mix-up with paperwork related to a holiday release program that was supposed to apply only to non-violent offenders serving sentences under 6 months. Victor did not qualify on either count, but somehow his name had ended up on the list. He had been released on unsupervised leave 3 days earlier, on December 22nd, the same day I drove to Bellefontaine. No one had notified me, because no one had realized the mistake until she called it in. The officer told me they would find him, that every unit in the county was being alerted, that I should stay with my friends and not go back to my apartment in Dayton until they had him in custody. She gave me her card and told me to call if I saw anything else. After the police left, I sat on Harper's couch wrapped in a blanket, unable to stop shivering even though the heat was on. The guests had all gone home. Greg was checking every lock in the house for the 3rd time. Harper sat next to me, holding my hand, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. Victor had tracked me here. He had known exactly where I was, 40 minutes from home, in a town I had never visited before. The officer mentioned later, when she called to update me, that they found a tracking app on his phone when they finally arrested him 2 days later at a gas station outside Columbus. He had installed something on my phone months ago, before the trial, and I had never known. He had been watching me the whole time, even from prison, even on Christmas. I still have the same phone number because the police said changing it would not matter, that men like Victor always find another way. Sometimes I think about that night, about how close he was, about what might have happened if I had stepped outside alone, or if the police had taken longer to arrive. I do not have an answer for why he did not try to come inside. Maybe he was waiting for me to be alone. Maybe he just wanted me to know he could reach me whenever he wanted. I moved to a different state 6 months later, and I have not been back to Ohio since. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. Some habits, it turns out, are there to keep you alive. Every year around mid-December, our neighborhood in Ashland, Kentucky puts together a Christmas charity drive at the old community center on Bellefonte Road. My wife Carla and I had been volunteering for about 3 years straight, and by 2023, we pretty much knew everyone involved. The whole thing runs on trust, you know what I mean? People from the area show up with bags of toys, canned goods, winter coats for kids who need them. Parents fill out these little cards with their children's names, ages, what they might want for Christmas. We sort everything in the back room, and then the week before Christmas, families come pick up their assigned packages. The guy who runs it, Phil Haney, is this retired postal worker who treats the whole operation like a military mission. Clipboard in hand, walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, the works. I turned 34 that November, and remember thinking how nice it was to be part of something good, especially after such a rough couple of years for everyone. That Saturday, December 9th, I showed up around 8 in the morning to help set up the folding tables and hang the donation signs outside. Carla was working a nursing shift at the hospital, so I came alone. Phil was already there with his wife, Georgia, and a few of the regulars were unloading plastic bins from their trucks. But there were 2 guys I had never seen before, both wearing the same red volunteer vests we all wore. One was tall, maybe early 40s, with a buzzed head and a goatee. The other was shorter, stocky, late 20s probably, with this blank expression that made him hard to read. Phil introduced them as Dale and Kenny, said they were cousins who had just moved to the area from West Virginia and wanted to help out. I shook their hands, said welcome aboard, and went back to setting up the check-in table near the entrance. At the time, I remember thinking it was cool that new people wanted to get involved. That thought makes me sick now. The morning went smooth. Families started trickling in around 9, carrying garbage bags full of wrapped presents and boxes of canned food. My job was to check people in, hand them a donation receipt, and point them toward the sorting area in the back. Dale and Kenny were assigned to the back room, helping organize everything by family name and age group. Phil trusted them right away because they showed up early and seemed eager. That is the thing about small towns. If someone shows up and acts helpful, people just assume they belong. Nobody asks for ID. Nobody runs background checks on volunteers for a church basement charity drive. You just take people at their word. I saw Dale a few times throughout the morning, carrying boxes, chatting with some of the moms, even helping a little girl who dropped her hot chocolate near the entrance. He seemed normal, friendly even. Around lunchtime, I took a break and walked to the back room to grab a bottle of water from the cooler. Kenny was standing by the table where we kept the family intake forms, the cards where parents wrote down their kids' names, ages, addresses, wish lists, all of it. He had a stack of them in his hands and was looking through them slowly, one by one. When he noticed me, he put them down quick and said he was just trying to figure out the sorting system. I told him the forms stay at the front desk with me, that we only use the colored tags in the back. He nodded, apologized, handed me the stack. His fingers were cold when they brushed mine, and he walked away without another word. I did not think much of it then. Maybe he was just confused about the process, but later, when everything came out, I kept replaying that moment. The way he was studying those cards, the way he put them down so fast when I walked in. He was not sorting anything. He was reading. The rest of the day moved fast. By 4 in the afternoon, we had collected enough donations to cover almost 60 families. Phil was thrilled, walking around thanking everyone, taking pictures for the community Facebook page. I noticed Dale in a few of those photos, smiling with his arm around some of the other volunteers. Kenny stayed in the background mostly, helping load boxes into the storage closet where we kept everything until distribution day. Around 5, people started heading home. I was packing up the check-in table when I realized the intake forms were not in the folder where I left them. I searched the table, checked under the chairs, asked Georgia if she had moved them. She had not. I found the folder 10 minutes later, sitting on a shelf in the storage closet, tucked behind a stack of coat donations. I assumed someone had misplaced it during the chaos. The forms were all there, so I did not make a big deal about it. I put them in my bag and brought them home like I always did, so I could enter the information into our spreadsheet for distribution day. Carla asked me how the event went when she got home from her shift. I told her it was great, that we got a lot of donations, that there were 2 new guys who seemed nice enough. I did not mention the thing with Kenny and the forms. It did not seem worth mentioning. 5 days later, on a Wednesday night, I got a call from Phil around 9. His voice sounded weird, tight, like he was trying to keep calm but failing. He asked if I had seen the news. I had not. Carla and I had been watching a movie, phones on silent. He told me to turn on the local channel right now. There was a story about an armed robbery at a house over in Russell, maybe 15 minutes from where we live. A family had been held at gunpoint while 2 men went through their home, took jewelry, electronics, cash, even the kids' Christmas presents from under the tree. The mom was pistol whipped when she tried to reach for her phone. Both kids, a boy and a girl, were locked in a bathroom for almost 2 hours while it happened. When they showed the security camera footage from a neighbor's porch, I saw them. 2 men in dark hoodies, walking up the driveway. The tall one with the buzzed head, the shorter one with that blank face. Dale and Kenny. I grabbed the armrest of the couch so hard my knuckles went white. Carla asked me what was wrong, and I could not even answer her. I just pointed at the screen. The news anchor was saying that police were looking for 2 suspects in connection with the robbery, and at least 3 other home invasions in Boyd and Greenup counties over the past week. They did not have names yet, just descriptions. White males, 1 tall with a shaved head, 1 shorter and heavyset, armed and dangerous. Do not approach. I sat there for a long time after the segment ended, just staring at the TV while some commercial played. My wife kept asking me what was going on, and finally I told her. I told her about the 2 guys at the charity drive, about Kenny going through the intake forms, about the folder ending up in the storage closet. She went pale. She asked if I was sure, and I said I was as sure as I could be without seeing their faces up close on that footage. But it was them. The way they moved, the height difference, even the way the shorter one walked with his shoulders hunched forward. I called Phil back and told him what I thought. He said he had been thinking the same thing since he saw the news. He had already called the police. The next morning, 2 detectives came to our house before I left for work. They sat at our kitchen table and asked me to describe everything I could remember about Dale and Kenny. What they looked like, what they said, how they acted, where they spent most of their time during the event. I told them about the forms, about finding Kenny with them, about the folder being moved. One of the detectives, a woman with short gray hair named Booth, wrote everything down without looking up. The other one, a younger guy, asked if we had any photos from the event. I remembered the pictures Phil took for the Facebook page. We pulled them up on my laptop right there at the table. There they were, both of them, smiling in their red volunteer vests like they belonged. Dale had his arm around Georgia in one shot. Kenny was in the background of another, standing near the toy donation bin, hands in his pockets. Detective Booth asked me to send her every photo we had. She also asked for the intake forms, the ones with all the family information. When I handed over the folder, she looked at it for a long moment, and then put it in an evidence bag without saying a word. I knew right then that those forms were how they picked their targets. Over the next few days, more details came out. The family in Russell was not random. The dad worked night shifts at a chemical plant, which meant the mom was home alone with the kids most evenings. They had listed 2 children on their intake form, ages 7 and 9, and requested winter boots and a gaming console. The address was right there on the card, along with a phone number. Police confirmed that at least 2 other families hit in the robbery spree had also participated in our Christmas drive. One lived in Flatwoods, about 10 miles east. The other was in Worthington, a small neighborhood near the river. Both had filled out the same intake forms. Both had been robbed while the husband or father was away at work. The men knew exactly when to strike because the forms asked about household size and work schedules. questions we included so we could coordinate delivery times. We never imagined someone would use that information to figure out when a home would be most vulnerable. I kept thinking about all the hands that touched those forms, all the families who trusted us with their personal details. And those two men, standing right there in our community center, wearing our vests, learning everything they needed to know. The police released their real names a week later. Dale was actually Martin Creech, 43 years old, with a record for burglary and aggravated assault going back to 2011. Kenny was his nephew, Cody Blevins, 26, with 2 prior arrests for breaking and entering. They had been using the charity circuit for months, apparently, volunteering at donation drives and food banks across 3 counties to gather information on families in need. Families who were already struggling, who had already been through hard times, who thought they were receiving help. The police found a notebook in their motel room with names, addresses, work schedules, even notes about which houses had dogs or security cameras. It was all written out like a shopping list. When I heard that, I had to step outside and sit on my porch for a while because I could not breathe right. I kept seeing Kenny standing at that table, flipping through those cards with his cold fingers, memorizing every detail while the rest of us carried boxes and smiled for pictures. They caught Martin Creech 3 days before Christmas at a gas station near Huntington, just across the West Virginia border. He tried to run, but did not get far. Cody Blevins turned himself in 2 days later after his face was all over the local news, and someone recognized him at a laundromat. Both of them are in custody now, facing multiple charges including armed robbery, assault, and unlawful imprisonment. The mom from the Russell family, the one who got pistol whipped, she needed surgery to fix a fracture in her cheekbone. Her kids are in therapy. I heard from Phil that she cannot sleep in her own house anymore, that the family is staying with relatives until they can figure out what to do. The other families are dealing with their own trauma too. One of them has a little boy who will not let his mom out of his sight, not even to go to the bathroom. These are people who asked for help during the holidays and got terrorized instead, and we let it happen. I know it is not really our fault, that we could not have known, but that does not make me feel any better. We gave those men access. We gave them vests and smiles and treated them like they were part of the community. Phil shut down the charity drive for good. He said he cannot do it anymore, that every time he thinks about organizing another event, he feels sick. Georgia told Carla that Phil barely sleeps now, that he blames himself for not asking more questions when those two showed up. The community center put up new security protocols, requiring background checks and ID verification for all volunteers going forward, but it feels like locking the door after everything has already been stolen. I still have trouble trusting new faces. Last month, a guy I did not recognize showed up at our church asking about the food pantry, and I watched him the entire time like he was about to pull a weapon. Carla says I need to talk to someone about it, and maybe she is right. But every time I close my eyes, I see that stack of intake forms in Kenny's hands. I see him reading the names of children, the addresses of struggling families, the schedules that told him exactly when they would be alone and afraid. And I think about how easy it was, how nobody questioned anything, how we just let them walk right in. Some memories sit inside you like stones, heavy and permanent, impossible to move even when you desperately want to. For 23 years, I carried one particular memory as if it were made of gold, polishing it every December, bringing it out at family dinners to make everyone smile. My parents, my brother Gavin, aunts and uncles and cousins, they all knew the story by heart. We moved into our apartment on Bleecker Street in New York City, right before the holidays in 1997. A cramped third-floor walk-up with clanking radiators and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors sneeze. My dad worked double shifts at a printing press across town while my mom waitressed at a diner 6 blocks away. And money was tight enough that Gavin and I shared a bedroom with bunk beds pushed against the window overlooking the fire escape. I was 5 that winter, young enough to believe in everything, and Gavin was 9. old enough to pretend he did not believe but still young enough to hope. That apartment was small and drafty, and the hot water never lasted more than 10 minutes. But I loved it because of what happened on Christmas Eve. Gavin shook me awake sometime after midnight, his hand clamped over my mouth so I would not make noise. I remember the feeling of his fingers cold against my lips, the way his eyes were wide and shining in the dim light from the street outside. He pulled me out of my bottom bunk and dragged me to the window, pointing at something on the fire escape with a trembling finger. When I looked through the frosted glass, my heart nearly exploded out of my chest. There was a man climbing down from the 4th floor, dressed in a full Santa Claus suit, red and white with black boots and everything. He moved carefully on the metal grating, one hand gripping the railing, and when he turned his head and saw us watching through the window, he stopped. I remember every detail of that moment with perfect clarity, the way the cold radiated off the glass, the sound of Gavin breathing fast beside me, the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. Santa looked right at us and smiled beneath his fake white beard. Then he raised one gloved hand and waved, slow and deliberate, before pressing a finger to his lips. "Stay quiet. Keep the secret." Gavin and I dove back into our beds and pulled the covers over our heads, giggling so hard we almost woke our parents. We had seen Santa Claus, we had actually seen him. It was the most magical moment of my entire childhood. The next morning we told our parents everything, tripping over each other's words in our excitement, describing the red suit and the wave and the finger pressed to his lips. My mom laughed and said Santa must have been running behind schedule and decided to use the fire escape as a shortcut. My dad ruffled my hair and told me I was lucky, that most kids never got to see the real thing. Neither of them seemed surprised or concerned, which only confirmed what Gavin and I already believed. Santa was real. He visited our building, and we were special enough to catch him in the act. That story became a cornerstone of our family mythology. Every Christmas for the next 2 decades, someone would bring it up. Remember when the boys saw Santa on the fire escape? Remember how excited they were? It spread to extended family, to friends, to co-workers at holiday parties. I must have told that story 100 times, adding little details here and there, embellishing the magic until it shone like a polished gem. The way his beard looked so real, the twinkle in his eye, the snow that started falling right after he disappeared down the ladder. Some of those details were invented over time. I know that now. But the core of the memory remained solid and unshakable. Gavin moved to Seattle after college, and we drifted apart the way siblings sometimes do, exchanging texts on birthdays and phone calls on holidays, but not much else. My parents stayed in that same apartment on Bleecker Street for almost 15 years before finally relocating to a retirement community in New Jersey. Life moved forward, and the Santa story became one of those family legends that everyone knows but nobody thinks about too deeply. Then my father got sick in the spring of 2024, a diagnosis that came fast and hit hard, and suddenly I was driving to New Jersey every weekend to help my mom with doctors and medications and all the logistics of watching someone you love fade away. It was during one of those long afternoons at their new place, sitting in the living room while my dad slept in the next room, that my mother said something that changed everything. She was looking at old photo albums, pausing on pictures from that first apartment, and she said, almost to herself, "I always wondered if we did the right thing, not telling you boys what really happened that night." I asked her what she meant, and she looked at me with this strange expression, like she was weighing something heavy in her mind. And then she shook her head and said, "It was nothing, just an old woman rambling." But I could not let it go. Something about her tone, the way she avoided my eyes after she said it, told me this was not nothing. I pressed her, gently at first, then more insistently as she kept deflecting. Finally, she put down the photo album and folded her hands in her lap the way she always did when she was about to say something difficult. She told me that on Christmas morning in 1997, the morning after Gavin and I saw Santa on the fire escape, there had been police officers in the building. 2 detectives in plain clothes going door to door, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything unusual during the night. My parents spoke to them in the hallway while Gavin and I were distracted with our presents, and the detectives told them something that made my mother grip the doorframe to keep from falling. A woman on the 4th floor, directly above our apartment, had been attacked in her home sometime after midnight. She was an elderly widow named Estelle Marino, who lived alone and kept to herself. Someone had broken into her apartment through the window, beaten her badly, and stolen everything of value they could carry. She survived barely and was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The detectives asked if my parents had seen anyone on the fire escape, anyone unusual in or around the building. My mother said she almost told them about what Gavin and I had seen. The man in the Santa suit climbing down from the 4th floor right around the time the attack must have happened. But my father stopped her. He pulled her aside and whispered that we were just kids, that it was Christmas, that telling us the truth would destroy something precious and innocent in us that we could never get back. The detectives had other leads, other witnesses, and they did not need 2 little boys to crack the case. So my parents said nothing. They smiled and shook their heads and closed the door, and they spent the next 27 years watching us tell that story at every family gathering, never once letting on what they knew. My mother's voice was shaking by the time she finished, and there were tears running down her cheeks. She said she had wanted to tell us so many times, especially after Estelle Marino died from her injuries a few weeks later. But the moment never seemed right. And then years passed and it became easier to just let the lie stand, to let us keep our magical memory of Santa on the fire escape. She asked me if I could ever forgive her. I did not know what to say. I just sat there, feeling something cold and dark spreading through my chest, rewriting every warm memory I had ever attached to that night. I drove home that evening in a daze, barely seeing the road in front of me. My mind kept circling back to that moment at the window, replaying it over and over with this new terrible context layered on top. The man in the Santa suit had just finished beating an elderly woman nearly to death. His gloves, the ones he waved at us with, might have still had her blood on them. The smile beneath the fake beard was not the smile of a jolly gift-giver making his rounds. It was the smile of a predator who had just gotten away with something monstrous. And the finger pressed to his lips, that gesture I had treasured for so long, was not a playful request to keep the Christmas magic secret. It was a warning. Stay quiet. Do not tell anyone what you saw. 2 little boys in their pajamas, witnesses to his escape, and he had silenced us with nothing more than a wave and a smile. The thought made me pull over to the side of the highway and sit there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. When I got home, I called Gavin in Seattle and told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line after I finished, and then he said something that made my throat close up. He said he had always known on some level that something was wrong about that night. He was 9 years old enough to notice things I was too young to catch. He remembered hearing strange sounds from the floor above us earlier that evening, thumping and scraping that he assumed was just the neighbors moving furniture. He remembered how the man on the fire escape had moved, not with the cheerful energy of someone playing Santa, but with the careful, deliberate steps of someone trying not to make noise. And he remembered the look in the man's eyes when he spotted us at the window, that split second before the smile appeared, when there was something else there entirely. Gavin said he had buried all of that because the alternative explanation was too good to question. Santa Claus, real and magical, right outside our window. What kid would choose to see anything else? But now, with the truth finally spoken out loud, all those buried details were rising to the surface like bodies in a lake. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could find about Estelle Marino and what happened to her. The internet did not have much, but I found some old newspaper archives through the public library that mentioned the case. She was 73 years old, a retired seamstress who had lived in that building for over 40 years. The article described the attack as particularly brutal, noting that the intruder had used a heavy object, possibly a lamp or a bookend, to strike her multiple times in the head. She had been found the next morning by her daughter, who came to pick her up for Christmas dinner, and discovered her lying unconscious in a pool of blood near the window. The police suspected the attacker had entered and exited through the fire escape, likely wearing a disguise to avoid being recognized by neighbors. They never caught him. The case went cold within a year, filed away with thousands of other unsolved crimes in a city that had too many to count. Estelle Marino died on January 15, 1998, from complications related to her injuries. She never regained consciousness to identify her attacker. Reading those articles made something shift inside me that I cannot quite explain. All my life I had thought of that night as a gift, a rare and precious brush with something magical. Now I understood that I had been inches away from a killer, separated by nothing but a pane of frosted glass. He could have opened that window. He could have come inside. Two little boys alone in their bedroom in the middle of the night, our parents asleep down the hall, completely unaware that a violent criminal was standing right outside our room. I thought about all the times I had told that story, smiling and laughing, describing the joy and wonder I felt when Santa waved at me. I had been celebrating a moment that happened directly after a woman was beaten nearly to death. I had been cherishing a memory of the man who killed her. The shame and horror of that realization hit me in waves, each one worse than the last. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I could not look at Christmas decorations without feeling sick to my stomach. My wife thought I was having some kind of breakdown, and maybe I was. My father passed away that August, never knowing that my mother had finally told me the truth. We buried him on a Thursday in a small cemetery in New Jersey, and afterward, while the rest of the family gathered at my parents' place for food and quiet conversation, I found myself standing alone in the backyard, staring at nothing. Gavin had flown in from Seattle for the funeral, and he came outside to stand beside me. We did not say anything for a long time. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said that he had been thinking about what to do with this thing we now knew, this terrible secret that had been weighing on both of us for months. He said he wanted to call the police, to tell them what we saw that night, even though it was almost 30 years too late. Not because he thought it would solve the case or bring anyone to justice, but because Estelle Marino deserved to have someone finally speak up for her. I thought about it for a while, watching the sun dip below the tree line, and then I nodded. We went inside and I looked up the number for the NYPD tip line, and Gavin made the call while I sat beside him, listening. The detective who called us back a few days later was polite but not particularly hopeful. He said the case had been cold for decades and that without more specific details, a description of the suspect beyond a man in a Santa suit, there was not much they could do. He thanked us for coming forward and said that our account would be added to the file, just in case anything else ever turned up. That was it. No dramatic breakthrough, no closure, no justice for Estelle Marino. Just our words added to a stack of paper in some forgotten filing cabinet, one more piece of a puzzle that would probably never be completed. But something in me loosened after that call, some knot that had been tightening in my chest since the day my mother told me the truth. I had spent my whole life keeping Santa's secret without even knowing it. Now, finally, I had broken my silence. It was not enough, but it was something. Christmas will never feel the same to me again. Every year when December comes around and I see the decorations going up and hear the carols playing in every store, I think about that man on the fire escape, his gloved hand raised in a wave, his finger pressed to his smiling lips. I think about how close he was to us, how easily he could have come through that window, how different everything could have been. And I think about Estelle Marino, alone in her apartment on Christmas Eve, the last night of her life, while two little boys in the floor below giggled under their covers and dreamed of magic. Some memories sit inside you like stones. This one will never leave me. Hannah was triple-checking the thermostat when I spotted him through the living room window. A guy in a full Santa Claus costume, walking down our sidewalk with a big red velvet bag over his shoulder. waving at neighbors like he owned the place. We live in this quiet subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of neighborhood where people still put up inflatable snowmen and string lights along their gutters every year. My wife and I were about to hit the road for her parents' house in South Carolina, a 5-hour drive we made every Christmas since we got married. I had turned 34 that October, and after 6 years of making that trip, the routine was pretty much automatic by then. Pack the car, set the timers on the lights, adjust the heat, lock up, and go. That Saturday morning, 2 days before Christmas Eve, everything felt normal. The sun was bright, the frost was melting off the grass, and Santa was making his rounds. He looked completely authentic, and I mean that. Red suit with white fur trim, shiny black boots, a thick white beard that could have been real for all I knew. He had a friendly face, the kind of guy who looked like he genuinely enjoyed playing the part. I watched him hand a candy cane to one of the Lawson kids from 3 houses down, then pose for a photo with their mom holding up her phone. Other neighbors were outside too, grabbing Amazon boxes from their porches or hanging last-minute decorations, and everyone seemed happy to see him. I figured he was doing some kind of charity thing, maybe from one of the churches on the main road, or a local business trying to spread holiday cheer. Hannah joined me at the window and smiled, saying it was nice to see people still doing stuff like that. We stood there for maybe a minute, watching him move down the street, completely oblivious to what he was actually doing. He made his way to our house about 10 minutes later. I was in the garage loading a cooler into the trunk when I heard the jingling. He had actual bells attached to his belt, which I thought was a nice touch at the time. I stepped out and he gave me this big warm smile, held out a candy cane and said something like, "Merry Christmas, neighbor," in a deep, friendly voice. We ended up chatting for a few minutes right there in the driveway. He asked if we were heading out for the holidays, and I told him yeah, driving down to see family for the week. He nodded and said half the street seemed to be doing the same thing, that it was nice to see people still making the effort to be together for Christmas. I remember thinking what a genuine guy he seemed to be. He asked about the drive, how long it would take, when we were planning to leave. I answered every single question without a second thought. Then he pointed at the Ring doorbell camera mounted next to our front door and made a joke about it. Said something about how those things must drive people crazy with all the notifications, especially around the holidays with all the delivery trucks coming and going. I laughed and told him he was right, that I usually turned off the motion alerts when we traveled, because otherwise my phone would blow up every time a squirrel ran across the porch. He chuckled at that and said it made sense, that there was no point in getting notifications you could not do anything about anyway. I even mentioned that our neighbors, the Mendozas next door, had the same system and probably did the same thing. He thanked me for the chat, wished me safe travels, and moved on to the next house. I went back inside feeling good, thinking about how nice it was to live in a neighborhood where people still looked out for each other. I had just handed a stranger a complete blueprint of our security vulnerabilities. We left for South Carolina around noon that day. The drive was uneventful. Hannah slept for most of it, and we arrived at her parents' house just before dark. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were great, exactly what you would expect. Good food, her mom's homemade pie, her dad complaining about football, the whole routine. I barely thought about the house back in Charlotte. I checked the Ring app once or twice out of habit, but like I told Santa, I had turned off the motion alerts so there was nothing to see. Just a still image of our empty porch with the wreath on the door. We were supposed to drive back on the 27th, but Hannah's mom convinced us to stay an extra day, so we did not leave until the morning of the 28th. I remember feeling relaxed on the drive home, thinking about how nice it was to disconnect for a few days. That feeling lasted until we turned onto our street. The first thing I noticed was the Mendoza's front door standing wide open. It was maybe 40 degrees outside, way too cold to have your door open like that. Then I saw Phil Mendoza standing in his driveway talking to a police officer, his wife Carmen sitting on the porch steps with her head in her hands. My stomach tightened. I pulled into our driveway and got out, and that is when I saw our front door. It was closed, but the frame around the lock was cracked and splintered, the wood pushed inward like someone had forced it open. I just stood there staring at it for a few seconds, not fully understanding what I was looking at. Hannah came around from the passenger side and grabbed my arm. She said my name, but I could not answer her. I walked up to the door and pushed it open, and the inside of our home looked like a tornado had gone through it. Drawers pulled out and dumped on the floor, couch cushions thrown aside, the TV gone from the wall with just the mounting bracket left behind. They had taken Hannah's laptop from the office, my PlayStation, a small safe I kept in the bedroom closet that had our passports and about $400 in cash. The jewelry box on her dresser was emptied out, including her grandmother's ring that she never wore because she was afraid of losing it. Cabinets in the kitchen were open, and I later found out they had taken a bottle of whiskey and some of Hannah's prescription medication from the bathroom. It was not just robbery, it was violation. Someone had gone through every room in our home, touched everything we owned, decided what was worth taking and what was not. Hannah started crying in the hallway, and I remember feeling this weird numbness, like my brain could not fully process what I was seeing. I called 911 and a patrol car showed up about 20 minutes later, but by then I had already talked to Phil next door and learned that we were not the only ones. The 7 houses on our street got hit that week. 7. The Mendozas, us, the Lawsons down the block, an older couple named the Burks on the corner, and 3 other families whose names I did not even know at the time. The pattern was obvious once the police started putting it together. Every single house that got broken into belonged to someone who had been away for Christmas. Every single one had told the guy in the Santa suit about their travel plans. Phil Mendoza told me he had a full conversation with Santa about driving to Florida to see his brother, even mentioned which days they would be gone. The Lawsons had talked about flying out on Christmas morning. The Burks told him they were spending the week with their daughter in Virginia. All of us had stood in our driveways or on our porches and given this stranger our complete schedules, and he had written it all down somewhere in that big red velvet bag. The cops told us later that he probably had a notebook or a phone in there, keeping track of everything while he smiled and handed out candy canes. The detective who took over the case was a woman named Reese, and she was the one who finally explained how it all worked. She said this kind of thing was more common than people realized, criminals using holiday disguises to scout neighborhoods because nobody suspects Santa Claus. She told me that the guy had probably walked our entire street in under 2 hours and collected enough information to plan a week's worth of burglaries. The costume gave him the perfect cover. People invited him into conversations, took photos with him, let their kids hug him. Nobody asked for identification or wondered why he was there because the Santa suit answered every question before it could be asked. Detective Reese said they had found similar cases in other states, guys dressing up as delivery drivers during the holidays, fake charity collectors, even people pretending to be carol singers. The holiday season makes everyone trusting, she said, and predators know how to exploit that. I sat in my ransacked living room listening to her explain all this, and I kept thinking about how I had smiled at him, shook his hand, wished him a Merry Christmas. The worst part was the conversation about the cameras. I could not stop replaying it in my head for weeks afterward. He had brought it up so casually, like it was just small talk, just a friendly observation about modern technology. And I had answered him without thinking, told him exactly how to avoid being recorded. I even mentioned the Mendozas, pointed right at their house and said they probably did the same thing. When Phil found out about that, he did not say anything to me, but I could see it in his face. His wife, Carmen, would not look at me for months. I had basically drawn a map for the guy, told him which houses were vulnerable and when they would be empty. Detective Reese said I should not blame myself, that these people were professionals and knew exactly what questions to ask, but that did not make me feel any better. I had spent years building a life in that neighborhood, and in one 5-minute conversation, I had helped destroy the sense of safety that everyone there used to feel. They never caught him. That is the part that still keeps me up at night sometimes. Detective Reese called me a few times over the following months with updates, but they never led anywhere. A couple of neighbors had taken photos with him, but the beard and the hat and the glasses he was wearing made identification almost impossible. One of the Lawson kids had a picture where you could see part of his face, but it was blurry and taken from a low angle. The police checked pawn shops, online marketplaces, anywhere stolen goods might show up, but nothing from our street ever surfaced. Whoever this guy was, he knew what he was doing. He probably sold everything out of state, or had connections that kept the stuff off the radar. The detective told me these operations were sometimes run by organized groups who targeted multiple neighborhoods across different cities during the holidays. Our street was just one stop on a longer route. That thought made it even worse somehow, knowing that we were not special, that we were just easy marks on a list. It has been almost 2 years now, and I still think about it more than I should. We got new locks, a better security system, cameras that stay on no matter what. I do not turn off the alerts anymore, even when we travel. Hannah says I have become paranoid, and maybe she is right, but I cannot help it. Every December, when the decorations go up and the holiday spirit takes over, I find myself watching the street a little more carefully. I see a Santa at the mall or ringing a bell outside a store, and my chest gets tight. I know most of them are just regular people doing a job or volunteering their time, but I also know that one of them might not be. That is what he took from me, more than the TV or the PlayStation or the cash in the safe. He took the part of me that used to trust strangers during the holidays, the part that believed a man in a red suit handing out candy canes could only have good intentions. I do not think I will ever get that back. Christmas of 2024 marked the first time I hosted my entire family at my own house. After spending most of my 20s grinding through nursing school and then clocking endless 12-hour shifts at St. Francis Hospital in Portland, I had finally reached a point where life felt stable. My husband Victor and I had bought our first house 6 months earlier, a beautiful 2-story Craftsman on Birchwood Lane, and inviting everyone over for Christmas Eve dinner felt like a rite of passage. My parents drove up from California. My younger brother Mateo brought his new girlfriend, and my aunt and uncle came with their 3 kids. The house was packed with 17 people total, and the chaos was exactly what I had dreamed about when we signed those mortgage papers. I remember standing in the kitchen that afternoon, watching everyone laugh and argue about the best way to season the ham, feeling like I had finally made it. The evening was loud in the best possible way. My uncle had set up a speaker system in the backyard, blasting a mix of Latin Christmas music that had the kids dancing on the patio. Victor was in charge of the grill, turning over carne asada while my dad supervised with a beer in hand and unsolicited advice on his lips. Inside, the TV was playing a holiday movie that nobody was watching, and the kitchen radio competed with its own stream of carols. Fireworks had started early in our neighborhood. Our neighbors on both sides were the type to begin celebrations at sundown, and the constant pop and crackle of explosions had become background noise. I did not mind the symphony of sounds. It felt festive, alive, like our little house had a heartbeat. What I did not realize then was how effectively all that noise would mask everything else. Around 8 in the evening, after we had finished the main course and everyone was scattered between the kitchen and the backyard picking at leftovers, I decided to stay behind in the living room to clean up. Plates were stacked on the coffee table, napkins crumpled on the couch, and someone had spilled red wine on the armrest of my favorite chair. I told Victor I would handle it while he kept the guests entertained. The living room sat at the front of the house, separated from the kitchen by a long hallway, and with the back door open for people to flow in and out, I could barely hear the conversations happening just 50 feet away. I had my own music playing on my phone, a podcast actually, some true crime thing I had been binging, and I moved methodically through the mess, grateful for a few minutes of quiet productivity. The front windows faced the street, and every few seconds the sky would light up pink or green from the neighbors' fireworks. I must have been cleaning for about 20 minutes when I realized I needed extra blankets. The temperature had dropped significantly, and my aunt had mentioned that the kids were getting cold on the patio. We kept spare blankets in the upstairs hallway closet, so I paused my podcast, set down the trash bag I had been filling, and headed for the stairs. Our staircase was one of those old wooden ones that creaked with every step, and I remember thinking how much I loved that sound. It gave the house character. I climbed slowly, my legs tired from standing all day, and reached the second-floor landing. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow coming from the bathroom nightlight we always left on. But as I turned toward the closet, I noticed something that made me stop mid-step. The door to our guest bedroom was open, and the light inside was on. I distinctly remembered closing that door and turning off that light before the guests arrived because I had tossed some gift-wrapping supplies in there that I did not want anyone to see. I stood there for a moment trying to rationalize it. Maybe one of the kids had wandered upstairs to explore. Maybe Victor had come up for something and forgot to turn the light off. It was a reasonable explanation, and I almost accepted it without question. But something kept me rooted to that spot in the hallway, a feeling I could not quite name. It was not fear, not yet. More like the sensation you get when you walk into a room and forget why you came in. A subtle wrongness. I took a breath and walked toward the guest bedroom, pushing the door open wider. The room looked mostly normal. The bed was made, the curtains were drawn, and the gift bags I had hidden were still sitting in the corner by the dresser. But then I noticed the closet. The sliding door was open about 6 inches, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had left it closed. I always left closet doors closed. It was one of those small habits that had followed me since childhood. Something about open closet doors at night that had always unsettled me. I walked over to the closet and slid the door open completely, half expecting to find one of my little cousins hiding inside as a prank. But it was empty. Just hanging clothes, some storage boxes on the shelf above, and the faint smell of the cedar blocks I kept in there to ward off moths. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding and told myself I was being ridiculous. Old houses settle, doors drift open, kids mess with things. I grabbed what I needed from the hallway closet, 2 thick quilts that my grandmother had made years ago, and headed back downstairs. But as I reached the bottom step, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a notification from our home security app. The message read, "Front door sensor triggered at 7:47 p.m. Alert delayed due to system overload." I stared at the screen, reading those words over and over. It was now 8:23 p.m. The alert had been delayed by more than 30 minutes, and I had been in the living room the entire time. My first thought was that it must have been one of the guests coming in through the front instead of the back. People had been moving around all evening, and maybe someone had stepped out to grab something from their car. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Everyone had parked in the driveway or along the side of the house, and the back door had been the main entrance all night. I scrolled through the app, looking for more information, but the system had been overwhelmed by the constant motion of 17 people, and had stopped recording video clips hours ago. The notification was all I had, a single line of text telling me that something had triggered the front door sensor at 7:47 p.m., right around the time the fireworks had started getting intense, right around the time the music in the backyard had been turned up to compete with the explosions. I thought about the guest bedroom upstairs, the light, the closet door. The timeline clicked into place in my head like puzzle pieces I did not want to see connected. I found Victor in the backyard, laughing at something my uncle had said, a fresh beer in his hand. I pulled him aside and showed him the notification, whispering so I would not alarm anyone else. He looked at the screen, then at me, and I could see him going through the same mental gymnastics I had. He asked if I was sure about the guest bedroom, if maybe I had just forgotten. I told him I was certain that I had specifically closed that door and that light because of the gifts. His expression changed then, the easy smile fading into something more serious. He handed his beer to my brother and told me to stay outside with everyone while he checked the house. I wanted to argue, wanted to go with him, but he was already walking inside before I could respond. I stood there on the patio, surrounded by my family, watching the back door close behind him, and I have never felt more afraid in my own home. The kids were still dancing, my mom was pouring more wine, and the fireworks kept screaming into the sky, and all I could do was count the seconds until Victor came back. He was inside for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 4 or 5 minutes. When he came back out, his face was pale and he was holding his phone to his ear. He walked straight to me and spoke quietly, his voice tight in a way I had never heard before. He told me he had found the window in our bedroom unlocked and cracked open about 2 inches. We never opened that window because the latch was broken and it would not stay up on its own. We had been meaning to fix it for months. Someone had propped it open from the inside with one of my hardcover books from the nightstand. He said he had also found muddy footprints on the carpet near the window, faint but visible, leading from the window toward the bedroom door. Whoever had been in our house had gone out through that window, probably when they heard me coming up the stairs. Victor was already on the phone with 911, and within 10 minutes there were 2 police cruisers parked in front of our home, their red and blue lights mixing with the colors of the fireworks still exploding overhead. The officers searched the entire house while my family huddled in the backyard, confused and frightened. My mother kept asking what was happening, and I could not bring myself to explain it fully, not yet. The police found more evidence that made my legs feel weak. There were scuff marks on the exterior wall beneath our bedroom window, suggesting someone had climbed down in a hurry. In the guest bedroom closet, the one I had checked and found empty, they discovered a small backpack wedged behind the storage boxes on the upper shelf, a spot I had not thought to look. Inside the backpack were zip ties, a roll of duct tape, a pocket knife, and a flashlight. The officer who showed it to me had this look on his face, a mixture of professional detachment and something like pity. He said it appeared that whoever entered our home had planned to wait, possibly for hours until the house was quiet and everyone was asleep. The realization hit me like a physical blow. While I had been cleaning wine stains off my furniture, someone had been hiding 15 feet above my head, listening to my podcast playing through my phone, waiting. The investigation that followed revealed something even more disturbing. Over the next few weeks, detectives connected our case to a string of similar incidents across the Portland metro area. A group of 3 men had been targeting homes specifically on Christmas Eve, taking advantage of the noise, the distractions, and the predictable patterns of holiday gatherings. They would scout neighborhoods in the days leading up to the holiday, looking for houses with large families arriving, multiple cars in driveways, and signs of outdoor celebrations. Their method was always the same: enter through an unlocked door or window during the loudest part of the evening, hide somewhere inside the home, and wait until the early hours of the morning when everyone was asleep. The police told us they had successfully burglarized at least 6 homes that way over the previous 2 years, and in 2 of those cases, the homeowners had woken up during the robbery and been physically assaulted. We were lucky, the detective said. The fact that I had gone upstairs when I did, that I had noticed the light and the closet door, had likely scared him off before he could settle in for the night. They caught all 3 of them in February after a neighbor's security camera captured their faces during another attempted break-in. I still live in that house on Birchwood Lane. Victor and I talked about moving, but in the end, we decided we would not let what happened take our home from us. We replaced every window latch, installed a better security system with backup alerts, and added motion sensor lights to every corner of the property. My family still comes over for holidays, though now we keep the music a little lower, and I find myself checking every room more times than I probably need to. Sometimes late at night, I think about how close it all came to being different. I think about what would have happened if I had not needed those blankets, if I had just stayed downstairs cleaning until everyone went to bed. I think about that backpack with the zip ties and the duct tape, and I think about the man who packed those items, who waited in my closet in the dark, listening to my footsteps below. Christmas Eve still makes me nervous in a way it never did before. I light candles, I play music, I watch my nieces and nephews run around the backyard, but part of me is always listening now, always checking the shadows, always aware that safety is something you can never fully guarantee, no matter how many people are in the room with you. Christmas Eve found me living alone in a rented farmhouse far from town, the kind of place people only pass if they're lost or looking for trouble. At that point in my life, isolation felt safer than company, and I'd chosen that house because the nearest neighbor was almost a mile away. Work had slowed down for the holidays, so the plan was simple: heat up leftovers, keep the lights low, and let the night pass quietly. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the cold sat heavy in the air, pressing against the walls like a weight. The wind kept pushing through the trees, making the porch creak in a way I'd learned to ignore. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing a mug, thinking how silent everything felt for a night that was supposed to be warm and full. The radio hummed softly in the background, some old holiday song distorted by static. That quiet, ordinary moment is burned into my memory now. The first sound that didn't belong was a dull thud against the front door, not loud enough to be urgent, but wrong enough to pull my attention. Another followed, heavier, like a shoulder instead of a hand. Through the frosted glass, a shadow shifted back and forth, uneven, swaying slightly. When a voice came through the door, it was slurred and thick, asking for someone by name, a name I didn't recognize at all. I answered through the door, telling him he had the wrong place, trying to keep my tone calm and steady. He laughed in a way that didn't match anything I'd said, then insisted I stop lying to him. The smell of alcohol seeped in when he leaned closer to the door, sharp and sour even through the wood. Each sentence he spoke circled back to the same demand. He needed to see someone who wasn't there. I cracked the door just enough to see him clearly, which I regret to this day. He was older than I expected. Beard uneven, eyes glassy, clothes damp as if he'd been walking for hours. One hand kept flexing at his side, opening and closing like it was remembering something it used to hold. I told him again that nobody by that name lived there, that he needed to leave, that I could call for help if he didn't. That's when his tone changed, dropping low, accusing me of hiding her, of thinking I was smarter than him. He shoved the door before I could react, the frame splintering as it gave way. The radio fell silent when it hit the floor, and suddenly the house felt much smaller. The next few minutes blurred together, but certain details won't leave me. His boots scraping across the wood floor, knocking over a chair as he moved deeper inside. The way he kept calling out that same name, louder now, angrier, like the walls were supposed to answer him. I grabbed the only thing within reach that felt solid enough to matter, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out my own thoughts. I shouted for him to leave, back toward the kitchen, every step calculated and slow. When he lunged, it wasn't with purpose, just rage and momentum. What happened after that stays locked behind a fog of noise, impact, and the smell of spilled liquor mixing with pine cleaner. When it finally stopped, the house went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. I stood there for a long time afterward, listening to the furnace kick on and off, trying to understand what had just happened inside my own living room. The intruder lay motionless near the doorway, his breathing shallow and uneven, eyes half open but unfocused. Blood had soaked into the edge of the rug in a dark, spreading shape that didn't match anything festive about the night. My ears rang, not from sound but from adrenaline, and every small noise in the house felt amplified. I remember noticing a crack in the wall I'd never seen before, and wondering if it had always been there. My legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else entirely. The cold from the open door crept across the floor, brushing against my ankles, and that's when I realized I was still barefoot. Eventually, instinct took over where thought couldn't. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and stepped outside into the freezing air to call for help. My voice sounded wrong to me, flat and distant, as I explained that someone had broken in and there'd been an altercation. I didn't know what else to call it at the time. While I waited, I watched my breath cloud up in front of me, counting each one like it might keep me grounded. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke from somewhere far off, mixing with the sharp scent clinging to my clothes. When headlights finally appeared down the long dirt drive, relief came mixed with a sudden fear of what I was about to say out loud. The people who arrived didn't ask many questions, at least not the kind I expected. They walked through the house slowly, exchanging looks instead of words, pausing when they saw the damage near the door. One of them asked if I knew the man's name, and I said no, because I truly didn't. Another asked who he'd been looking for, and when I repeated the name, he'd kept shouting. There was a brief, tense silence. I caught a flicker of recognition pass between them before they moved on. The man was taken away without ceremony, wrapped in a blanket that quickly darkened. Nobody explained where he was going or what would happen next. After that night, things changed in ways that never made it into any official report. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before started leaving food on my porch without knocking, avoiding eye contact if I saw them in town. Someone fixed my door while I was away, refusing payment and telling me it was better that way. The name the intruder had kept repeating became something people avoided, like saying it might bring him back. No charges were ever mentioned, no follow-ups made. Life moved on around me, but Christmas Eve never felt the same again. Even now, when the wind hits the house just right, I think about how quickly ordinary silence can turn into something else entirely. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in that house longer than I probably should have, trying to convince myself that leaving would mean letting the night win. I scrubbed the floor where the rug had been, even after the stain was gone, until the wood lost its shine. Sleep came in short bursts, always shallow, always interrupted by dreams where someone stood just out of sight, calling a name that echoed through empty rooms. I stopped playing music at night because silence felt easier to control than sound. Every knock, even during the day, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. People around town acted kind but careful, like they were handling something fragile. Nobody asked for details and nobody offered explanations either. Eventually, I asked one of the older locals about the name, doing my best to sound casual. The conversation ended faster than it began, his expression closing off as if I'd crossed a line without knowing it. He told me some things were better left where they fell and suggested I focus on moving forward. That answer followed me home, sitting heavier than any clear explanation would have. It was then I noticed small things that hadn't registered before, like how the mailbox had once been repainted over an older name, or how the barn behind the house had been locked from the outside for years. None of it proved anything, but it all hinted at a past I'd unknowingly stepped into. I stopped asking questions after that. By the time spring started pushing through the frost, I made the decision to leave. Packing felt strange, like I was dismantling a life that never fully belonged to me. On my last night there, I walked through each room with the lights on, touching the walls, listening to the house settle. Nothing happened, no sounds, no shadows, just an overwhelming sense of finality. I locked the door, slid the key into the drop box, and didn't look back down the long drive. The house disappeared behind the trees, swallowed by distance and darkness. Some places don't need ghosts to be haunted. Even now, years later, I think about how easily I could have ignored that first knock. The official version of events never existed, and I learned to live without one. What matters is that the situation ended, and I walked away alive, carrying answers I didn't ask for and questions I no longer chase. The locals moved on, and so did I, but there's an unspoken understanding that binds us to that night. Christmas Eve still makes me uneasy, no matter where I am. Silence, I've learned, can hold more weight than any confession. The winter after the separation felt unreal, like life was happening a few inches to the left of where it should have been. At that point, I was living in a rented townhouse with my 2 kids, trying to keep routines intact while everything else shifted under our feet. Money was tight, emotions were tighter, and the holidays only magnified what was broken. I worked mornings at a logistics office and afternoons were a blur of homework, grocery lists, and pretending things were normal. Christmas Eve arrived with that forced cheer people wear when they're exhausted but determined. I remember thinking that if we could just get through that day, maybe the worst was behind us. The kids were excited in that quiet, cautious way children get after a big change. I was focused on keeping the peace, even if it meant swallowing my own discomfort. The knock came in the early evening, sharp and deliberate, not the casual tap of a neighbor. Opening the door, I was met by my ex standing too straight, coat zipped all the way up, eyes locked past me toward the hallway. He hadn't told me he was coming, which was already against what we'd agreed through lawyers. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, as he said he deserved time with the kids on Christmas Eve. There was something unsettling about how he avoided looking at me, like I was furniture in my own house. He insisted it should be just him and them. No distractions, no arguments. I remember the smell of cold air and peppermint gum when he stepped inside. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but I was tired of fighting and didn't want a scene in front of the kids. They sat together in the living room while I hovered in the kitchen, pretending to clean already clean counters. Laughter drifted in short bursts, then long stretches of silence that made the house feel hollow. At one point, I heard him talking about how families are supposed to stay together, how kids need both parents under one roof. His tone wasn't angry, just flat, like he was stating facts no one else could see. I checked the clock more times than I can count, noticing how slowly the minutes crawled. When I finally went to check on them, he suggested taking them for a drive to look at lights, saying it would be their special tradition. Against my better judgment, I agreed, setting a clear return time and watching their car disappear down the street. Hours passed with no word. Calls went straight to voicemail, texts sat unread, and the unease grew into something heavier that pressed on my chest. When the car finally returned, only one door opened. He said our youngest wanted to stay somewhere special, that it was a surprise and I should trust him. The way he said trust made it sound like a test. Panic took over as I realized my child wasn't there, shoes and jackets still by the door, favorite stuffed animal missing too. I locked the door, called the police, and watched his composure crack for the first time. As officers arrived and began asking questions, it became clear this wasn't impulsive. He had packed clothes, withdrawn cash, and written notes about starting over the right way, convinced he alone could fix what we broke. The house filled with voices and radios, the kind of controlled chaos that makes everything feel unreal. Officers moved through each room while I answered the same questions over and over, my words starting to sound foreign even to me. One detective, a woman named Marissa, knelt to my child's level, gently asking what their last moments together looked like. My oldest described the drive, the quiet music, the way their parent kept glancing at the rearview mirror instead of the road. There was mention of a notebook in the car, something filled with scribbles and underlined sentences. When they brought it back later, I saw phrases about rebuilding trust and correcting mistakes, written in a careful, almost childlike handwriting. It felt less like a diary and more like instructions. That's when the fear shifted into something colder and sharper. Search efforts started almost immediately, spreading out from our neighborhood while Christmas lights blinked on nearby houses. I stood on the porch wrapped in a blanket someone handed me, listening to dogs bark in the distance and radios crackle with updates. Every passing minute felt stolen, like time itself was complicit in what was happening. Marissa stayed close, explaining each step in a steady voice, telling me where they were looking and why. They traced his route through traffic cameras and toll records, piecing together a path that led away from anything familiar. A receipt found in the car pointed towards supplies meant for an extended stay. Hearing that confirmed what I'd been trying not to accept. This wasn't about a holiday visit. It was about control, wrapped in the language of love. As the night deepened, a call came through that changed the tone of the room. They had located a vehicle matching the description near a remote cabin owned by a distant relative. Officers moved quickly, coordinating quietly as if sound itself might ruin everything. I was driven there by Marissa, the road stretching endlessly ahead, headlights cutting through darkness that seemed too thick. When we arrived, the place looked untouched, smoke rising from a chimney, a single window glowing faintly. I remember gripping the door handle as voices outside called out, the tension hanging heavy in the cold air. A child's cry broke through the stillness, raw and unmistakable. Relief and terror collided in a way I still can't fully describe. They brought my child out wrapped in a jacket far too big, eyes wide but alert, clutching that familiar stuffed animal like an anchor. Inside the cabin, officers found plans taped to the walls, diagrams of a new routine, lists of rules meant to make everything perfect again. He was taken away without resistance, still insisting he was doing what was best. Watching that unfold felt like witnessing someone argue with reality itself. Back home in the early hours of morning, the decorations looked wrong, like props from a play I never wanted to be part of. Even now, I lock every door twice and question every knock. That day ended with my family physically together, but something fundamental had been permanently altered. In the days that followed, investigators explained more than I wanted to know. They showed me copies of emails he had never sent, drafts addressed to therapists, teachers, even future versions of the kids. Everything revolved around the idea that removing obstacles would restore order, that isolation could somehow reset our lives. Marissa told me resentment can age quietly, turning into something methodical when left unchecked. Hearing that made the whole night feel less random and more calculated. The realization hurt in a different way, because it meant the danger had been growing while I was busy managing daily chaos. I replayed every interaction from that evening, wondering where I could have interrupted the chain. There was no comfort in the answers, only clarity. My youngest didn't talk much about the cabin at first, only mentioning the cold floor and the sound of wind against the walls. Over time, small details surfaced, like being told this was a test of loyalty or that secrets were necessary for happiness. Those words cut deeper than anything else because they sounded rehearsed, practiced. Therapy became part of our routine, slow and frustrating but necessary. I learned how children absorb tension without understanding it, how they internalize responsibility for adult choices. Some nights ended with questions I couldn't fully answer, about why love could feel so frightening. All I could do was stay present, proving through consistency what words couldn't fix. The legal process moved forward with a grim efficiency, restraining orders and supervised visits replacing what once passed for trust. I packed away holiday decorations that still smelled faintly of pine, unable to look at them without feeling that familiar not return. Friends tried to help by keeping things light, but there was an invisible line I couldn't cross anymore. I became more alert, more deliberate, noticing patterns in people's behavior I would have ignored before. It wasn't paranoia so much as awareness sharpened by experience. Safety stopped being an abstract idea and turned into a daily practice. That shift changed how I saw the world, for better or worse. Now, when I think about that Christmas Eve, it feels sealed in its own space, like a room I rarely enter but never forget exists. The plan unraveled before it could become permanent, and that's the part I hold on to. My family is still fractured, still healing, but intact in the ways that matter most. I don't understand how someone can convince themselves they're saving others by taking everything away. Maybe I never will. What I do know is that obsession doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers, patiently, until someone listens. And sometimes surviving means recognizing that whisper before it finishes its sentence. Christmas week had already been chaotic before the snow even started. I had driven out to my aunt's place to help her host a small family gathering, expecting a loud house, too much food, and a couple of uncomfortable nights on an old couch. At that point in my life, things were steady but dull, long work days, not much excitement, and honestly, I welcomed the forced pause. The house sat at the edge of a wooded neighborhood, nothing isolated, but not close enough to neighbors to feel crowded either. By the afternoon, thick snow began falling harder than anyone predicted, turning the driveway into a white slope and cutting off the main road. Phones buzzed with alerts saying travel wasn't recommended, and suddenly leaving wasn't an option anymore. What was supposed to be a quick visit turned into everyone being stuck together overnight. At first it felt cozy, almost movie-like, with lights glowing in the windows and snow piling up outside. None of us thought anything bad could happen on a night like that. The house itself had a strange layout that always made me uneasy. From the back windows, you could see the yard stretch farther than expected, ending at an old storage shed that leaned slightly to one side. During the day, it looked harmless, cluttered with tools and half buried by snowdrifts. That evening, while we cleaned up after dinner, I noticed the outdoor motion light flicker on briefly, then shut off again. No one else seemed to notice, and I told myself it was probably snow triggering the sensor. Still, I kept glancing at the back window, watching flakes whip sideways under the porch light. The wind made odd scraping sounds along the fence, sharp and irregular. Every now and then, the shed disappeared behind swirling white, then reappeared, darker than the yard around it. I remember thinking the backyard felt bigger at night, stretched out and harder to read. That was the first moment the night stopped feeling festive to me. Most of the house went quiet earlier than expected. People were tired, kids asleep, and the storm kept pounding the roof with a low, constant hiss. I stayed up longer than I should have, sitting near the back window with my phone, trying to get a signal. That's when I noticed movement near the shed. Not fast, not dramatic, just a shape where there hadn't been one before. I leaned closer, wiping condensation from the glass, and saw a figure standing near the side of the structure. They weren't walking through the yard, just lingering, like they knew exactly where they wanted to be. The motion light didn't turn on this time, which somehow made it worse. I waited for the figure to move again, half expecting it to vanish like my imagination playing tricks. Instead, it shifted slightly, enough to confirm it wasn't part of the storm. I stepped back from the window without making a sound. I didn't wake anyone right away, and that still bothers me. Instead, I watched from different angles, checking other windows, trying to understand what I was seeing. By the time I grabbed a flashlight and looked down at the yard, the figure was gone. What wasn't gone were the marks in the snow. Heavy footprints led from the fence line toward the shed, deep and deliberate, not rushed. Near the shed door, snow had been disturbed, and a metal tool lay half buried, like it had been dropped and forgotten. That's when I checked the outdoor camera feed on my phone. The footage was incomplete, grainy, cutting out every few seconds, but it showed enough. Someone had been there earlier, circling the yard slowly, checking angles, stopping near windows. The recording ended abruptly, like the signal had been interrupted. Standing alone in that quiet house, I realized whatever had been planned hadn't finished, but not because someone changed their mind. I woke my aunt after that, and the mood in the house shifted fast. Sleepy confusion turned into tight silence as we checked doors, locked windows, and pulled everyone into the living room. No one wanted to say the word intruder, but it hung there anyway. The snow outside kept falling, erasing details even as we tried to study the yard with flashlights. When daylight finally crept in through the curtains, the backyard told a clearer story. The footprints hadn't wandered randomly. They traced a clean path from the fence to the shed and back again. Someone had avoided the porch light entirely, staying in blind spots. Near the shed, we found a small canvas bag tucked behind a stack of firewood. Inside were gloves, a pry bar, and zip ties sealed in plastic. No one brought tools like that by accident. The shed door showed fresh damage, a splintered edge where someone had tested the lock and stopped. It wasn't forced open, just weakened enough to come back later. That detail stuck with me, the idea that whoever it was hadn't been in a rush. The storm had given them cover, sound, and time. We checked the rest of the yard and found more signs near the back of the house, places where snow had been brushed away near windows, as if someone had leaned in to look. Inside, the kids were kept away from the windows, and the adults spoke in low voices, careful not to panic anyone. Cell service was spotty, but eventually a call went through to local authorities. They said help would come when roads cleared, which felt like an eternity away. Until then, we were on our own in a house that suddenly felt exposed. While we waited, we reviewed the camera footage again, frame by frame. The person never showed their face clearly, always staying just outside the strongest light. At one point, they paused near the shed and looked straight toward the house, head tilted slightly, like they were listening. The camera cut out right after that. We realized the interruption wasn't random. The signal dropped only when the figure stood close to the shed's side wall. That wall backed up to the utility box for the outdoor wiring. Someone had likely known where to stand. The idea that this was planned, not spontaneous, settled heavy in my chest. If the storm hadn't trapped us there, if we'd left earlier like planned, the house would have been empty. That thought made the room go very quiet. By late morning, the snow finally eased and tire tracks appeared on the road beyond the trees. When officers arrived, they confirmed what we already feared. The tools weren't random, the path through the yard was intentional, and the shed damage suggested staging. Whoever it was had likely expected an empty house after dinner, not a group stranded by weather. Chance had ruined their timing. The officers took the bag, photographed everything, and told us this kind of setup wasn't unheard of during holidays. As they left, one of them said something I haven't forgotten. They'll usually come back if they think they weren't seen. That night, no one slept near a window. We kept lights on, doors barricaded, and watched the yard until exhaustion finally won. The rest of the day passed in a strange, stretched-out tension. We tried to go back to normal Christmas routines, reheating food, making coffee, keeping the kids distracted with movies, but everything felt staged, like we were pretending for the sake of sanity. Every sound outside pulled attention toward the windows. Snow slid from tree branches with dull thuds, and each one made someone flinch. I kept replaying the footage in my head, the way the figure stopped and angled their body toward the house, as if counting people inside by sound alone. I remember noticing small things that wouldn't have mattered before, like how thin the back door glass was, how close the shed really sat to the fence. Familiar spaces felt remeasured, reevaluated, stripped of comfort. By afternoon, the storm had fully cleared, leaving behind a blinding white yard that showed every mark too clearly. That's when we found something else. Near the far side of the fence, partially hidden by drifted snow, there was a second set of footprints. These didn't lead toward the house. They ran parallel to the property line, stopping at a spot where the fence bowed slightly inward. The officers hadn't noticed them earlier because the snow had still been falling then. This path suggested someone else had been watching from a distance, not approaching, just observing. When we pointed it out later, we were told it could have been old tracks, maybe from a neighbor, but the depth matched the others exactly. Same weight, same stride length. That detail sat wrong with me. It suggested patience, coordination, maybe even a backup plan that never got used. Whatever had been interrupted wasn't small. By evening, the roads were finally clear enough for us to leave. Packing up felt rushed and quiet. Nobody joking, nobody lingering. Before getting in my car, I walked one last time to the back of the house with my aunt. She locked the shed with a new padlock, heavier than the old one, her hands moving faster than usual. The yard looked peaceful again, almost harmless, but I couldn't stop imagining how different it would have felt arriving to an empty house. On the drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, not because I saw anything, but because my sense of privacy felt permanently cracked. The idea that chance alone had changed the outcome made it harder to shake. There was no dramatic confrontation, no face to remember, just evidence and intention left behind. Nothing else ever happened at that house. No break-ins, no return visits, no arrests. Life moved on the way it always does, slowly covering the memory with routine. Still, every Christmas since then, heavy snow makes my chest tighten. I think about how easily plans form in someone else's mind, unseen, waiting on timing. Whatever had been meant for that night didn't vanish. It simply lost its moment. And knowing that the only thing standing between safety and something far worse was a weather report feels more unsettling than any clear explanation ever could.